Welcome to Ayurveda and Spirituality with your host, Alakananda Ma, a renowned Ayurvedic expert and a graduate of a top London medical school. She is the principal of Alundi Ayurveda Gurukula, a unique apprenticeship-style school in Boulder, Colorado. She is a spiritual mother, teacher, flower essence maker, and storyteller. Join us as we uncover the timeless principles of Ayurveda, discover practical tips for enhancing vitality, and explore the deeper dimensions of spirituality that intertwine with the ancient science of life.
Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. Today we are going to talk about the 4 pillars of peace. It's essentially something I've been thinking about since the mid-60s. Pope John XXIII talks about the 4 pillars of peace in his 1963 encyclical Pacem in Terris, Peace on Earth, on establishing universal peace in truth, justice, charity, and liberty. It would have been I was only 11 at the time the encyclical came out. It would have been perhaps a few years later that I discovered this encyclical and started thinking about what it meant to establish universal peace in truth, justice, charity, and liberty. Let's start with a quote from the encyclical itself, just noting that this was written in Rome in 1963, so it does use language that nowadays we would regard as sexist. So we'll just have to put up with it if we want to make a proper quote. Before a society can be considered well-ordered, creative, and consonant with human dignity, it must be based on truth. St. Paul expressed this as follows: "Putting away lying, speak ye the truth, every man with his neighbour, for we are members of one another." End quote from Paul. And so will it be if each man acknowledges sincerely his own rights and his own duties toward others. Human society, as we here picture it, demands that men be guided by justice, respect the rights of others, and do their duty. It demands, too, that they be animated by such love as will make them feel the needs of others as their own. That they be animated by such love as will make them feel the needs of others as their own, and induce them to share their goods with others, and to strive in the world to make all men alike heirs to the noblest of intellectual and spiritual values. Nor is this enough, for human society thrives on freedom, namely, on the use of means which are consistent with the dignity of its individual members, who, being endowed with reason, assume responsibility for their own actions. So let's take a little while to think about each of these 4 pillars and how they do contribute to any real peace. So the first is truth. Peace cannot be built on a lie, and it cannot be built on denial. For example, we cannot create peace in the family by denial of abuse or dysfunction. I have heard so many stories from so many hundreds, perhaps thousands of patients about this exact subject. We cannot create peace in society without a basis of truth. And let's think about truth and reconciliation commissions that have tried to do just that. The South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that was established in 1995 after the dismantling of apartheid, and it was chaired by the great Archbishop Desmond Tutu. So it allowed victims to recount the human rights abuses that they had endured. And it also gave amnesty to perpetrators who told the truth, who fully disclosed what they had done. So trying to bring about a society in which people can live together. This also went on in Rwanda. You're supposed to go back to the village and live with someone that killed your family. What are you going to do? There has to be tremendous truth-telling, reconciliation, and then justice, both restorative and punitive as needed. There's also a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada, and that was created in 2008 to document the devastating history and legacy of the Indian residential school system, the Indian boarding schools. So that's another attempt at truth and reconciliation, just by letting the truth be known, by no longer hiding what happened to those children and those families. When I watch the news every day, or sometimes watch the UN General Assembly or the UN Security Council, I'm really impressed by the prevalence of hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is like lying. Hypocrisy is the opposite of truth. And what I see almost every day is that countries are going to cite international law only when it serves us to do so. An example is to label Putin a war criminal, because Putin is wanted by the ICC for potential war crimes. He's indicted. But not labeling Netanyahu, the US, and this was Biden, not labeling Netanyahu a war criminal, even though Netanyahu was wanted by the ICC equally as much as Putin. That kind of conduct is not truthful. When we say one thing that is true and we do not say another thing, when we engage in this kind of hypocrisy and distortion and twisting, there is no truth and therefore there is no peace. We saw an example just the other day with Marco Rubio saying, no, there can't be tariffs to cross the Strait of Hormuz. It's international waters, and there are international laws that govern shipping. Very good, right? Very true. This is so accurate. There is international law. We can't do things that go against international law. Whoa, wait a minute. Did we not just well, I think it was back in April, launch an unprovoked war of aggression? Was that not a violation of international law? Who are we to talk about international law? I'm out there in the garden weeding, and I keep thinking the pot calling the kettle black. The pot calling the kettle black. I mean, what? We care about international law only when it suits us. We are not a friend of truth. But then Iran, too, acting all righteous about international law, despite what Iran did in Syria. And what to speak of killing thousands of peaceful protesters at home. Those people had a right to protest. They had a right to free assembly. They had rights. They were killed. Or, beyond hypocrisy, just straight up lies and propaganda. Justifying bombing Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza on the basis of Hamas tunnels under the hospital without showing any evidence of such tunnels. We're even now seeing places, wonderful and beautiful and important places in Lebanon being bombed. Hezbollah has tunnels in them. Just quit with, if you're going to violate international law to the extent of bombing a hospital, Just tell us we are setting aside international law, we're bombing a hospital. But now you have made an incredibly bad thing even worse by lying, by all the lies and propaganda about it. So truth cannot be built on a lie. Truth cannot be built by taking one part and hiding another part. Truth cannot be built on twisting, nor on propaganda. None of this is truth, and thereby anything that results from this will never be peace. And truth is fundamental to peace. Without truth, there is no peace. What about justice? No justice, no peace. Where does this really come from? Let's think about the spring of 1967 and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and he is protesting with other African American leaders outside the UN headquarters. And he is reading a petition. Let's quote a little bit. From towns and villages, cities, campuses and farms, we have come in tens of thousands to march and rally at the United Nations in New York and at the birthplace of the World Organization in San Francisco on the 15th day of April in 1967, he said. They are protesting the war in Vietnam. We, the participants in today's unprecedented national peace demonstration, although of many national origins, faiths, and shades of political opinion, are united in our conviction of the imperative need for an immediate, peaceful solution to an illegal and unjustifiable war. We are determined that the killing be stopped and that a nuclear holocaust be avoided. We rally at the United Nations in order to reaffirm our support of the principles of peace, universality, equal rights, and self-determination of the peoples embodied in the Charter and acclaimed by mankind, but violated by the United States. The UN Charter, we the peoples of the world, is in so many ways modeled on the founding documents of the United States, what the ideals which the United States is supposed to embody, and yet on a daily basis violates. In terms of the priority of the peace movement and the civil rights movement, King said, these issues are inextricably tied together. In the final analysis, there can be no peace without justice, and there can be no justice without peace. Justice and peace are inextricably tied together. And then Pope Paul VI, who succeeded Pope John XXIII and continued the work of the Second Vatican Council and the work of bringing the Church into the 20th century and now the 21st century and a new paradigm. On the celebration of the Day of Peace, on the 1st of January in 1972, Paul VI says, if you want peace, work for justice. It sounds familiar, doesn't it? Because no justice, no peace is the slogan that we hear in the Black Lives Matter protests, which regrettably have been, although they have been going on since the mid-80s, they still go on and they still have to go on because the same violations of the human rights and civil rights of Black people continue to happen. Positive, sustainable peace can only happen when we overcome structural violence. Conditions of structural violence oppress marginalized communities, and they stop people living fulfilling lives of dignity. So we really deeply have to understand these words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., this proclamation of peace of Paul VI, if you want peace, work for justice, this chant that echoes in the streets, alas, not only year after year, but decade after decade, because the problem is not solved. This is the call for real peace through justice. I've also been thinking about how there is no potential for real peace in this country because the genocide of the Native American people has never ended, and no real peace has been brought about. I'm quoting here from Trudy Mercadal, PhD, about the American Indian Wars. That's a series of conflicts. First it was conflicts with the colonists, later then the U.S. government, against the conflicts with the indigenous people of North America. Wars that went on from the beginning of colonization in the early 17th century. Remember Shakespeare in Love, if you saw that film? He's going off to start a new life in a new world, which is sparkling and beautiful, except for the fact that it was already somebody's country. And kept going until approximately 1890. Because the colonies were encroaching on native lands. And because of profound cultural misunderstandings. Even the greatest of intellectuals and activists of the day, people like Harriet Beecher Stowe, still did not think that the Native Americans were truly human. They didn't want them genocided, they didn't want them killed, but they didn't understand. They didn't understand because they were women of their time. And there were also all these, Mercadal says there were also complex international dynamics involving European empires. And just this policy of manifest destiny, pressuring native populations into increasingly confined territories, the reservations, through violence, really through violence. The native people fought because they had to, but they could not win against the vast, endless number of the white people who were coming against them and the kind of weapons that they had. So they fought back, but they lost their lives, they lost their land, they lost their way of life. And it culminated in 1890 with the Wounded Knee Massacre. And the genocide goes on. There is still no justice and no truth for the Native American people. There is no truth because the treaties have been broken again and again and again. So there is no truth, there is no justice for the original inhabitants of this land. Broken treaties have led to broken lives and broken societies. And one wonders how there can truly be peace in this country, a country where stolen people worked stolen land. Because we have no commission on truth and reconciliation, and we have no process for justice for the original inhabitants of this land. And we'll be talking in subsequent podcasts about some deeper understandings of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And the question gets asked, does Israel have a right to exist? But does any country formed on colonization and oppression have a right to exist? It's pragmatic. There's nowhere for us to go. I happen to be a dual citizen, but most people here aren't. They don't have anywhere else to go. They largely don't speak any other languages. Where are they going to go? Everyone can't leave this country because it was wrongly and illegitimately taken from the people it belongs to, who were stewarding that land. But we need truth, we need reconciliation, and we need justice. And then love, caritas, in the original Latin of the encyclical, so sometimes translated to charity. Caritas is such an important foundation of truth, of peace. We really cannot have peace without love, and as Pope John XXIII said, peace demands that we be animated by such love as will make us feel the needs of others as our own and induce us to share our goods with others and to strive in the world to make everyone heirs to the noblest of intellectual and spiritual values. Not just that everyone should have a crust of bread to eat. Everyone should have the right to pursue a full human life and actualize intellectual and spiritual values. Caritas. In 2015, for the 70th anniversary of the ending of World War II, I did a series of interviews with people I called the living witnesses, those who had lived through the war. I interviewed them and wrote their story in my blog, and one of the people I interviewed was my friend Bebel, a war baby. I will put a link to one of the blogs where she was speaking to me in the podcast notes. When the war ended, it was an armistice, and that's what Bebel said. It was not peace, she said. It was a laying down of arms, for it was an unconditional surrender. Not peace, but an armistice, a laying down of arms. The war was over, but peace was still to be found. Bebel was still hungry, still homeless, for her home had been taken over by others. So still hungry, she and her mother still struggling. So let us be very clear, my dear friends. There is no peace in a world where children go to bed hungry. We are not at peace as long as any child is going to bed hungry. There is no peace in a world where billionaires and now, God save us, trillionaire, pit us against each other in a struggle for scarce resources. Scarce because they have them all. They pit us against each other. We've just seen how this has been playing out in the United Kingdom. The fostering of xenophobia and racism and anti-immigrant hate. Peace is not compatible with hatred. If in a world of racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, anti-immigrant hatred, and so on, There is no peace. Peace is not compatible with hatred. Peace depends on love. As we quoted from John XXIII from the encyclical, a real care for the flourishing of others. A real care for the flourishing of others. To understand that everyone is equally important as I am. Have the same hopes, have the same dreams, have the same needs, have the same wants that I have. And their needs are just as important as mine are. And then let's think of liberty. Libertas. There can be no peace without freedom, because freedom is inherent to our nature, and every oppressed or enslaved people will eventually rise up to claim their human birthright. One need only think of, in England, the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, where they are demanding the end of serfdom, because serfdom is a violation of our inherent right to freedom. Numerous, perhaps 300 smaller and larger slave revolts in the US because being enslaved is not normal, is not natural, violates the inherent liberty of a human being. The American War of Independence itself and the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, they're all examples of the impossibility of having true peace without freedom. Then we can think of non-violent movements like those of Gandhi, working for Swaraj, for the true freedom and independence of India, and the work of, again, Martin Luther King Jr. This inspires us to work for peace with soul force. There is no peace when people are not free. I'm going to end with a poem I wrote some years back. It's called You Cannot Make Peace with a Sword. You cannot make peace with a sword. You cannot make peace with guns. You cannot make peace with bombs and drones. You cannot make peace with a wall. You cannot make peace with nuclear arsenals. You cannot make peace with secret deals between a weaker party and a stronger. You cannot make peace with a treaty written in the blood of innocents. The peace that is kept by lies and coercion is not peace, but a festering wound. The peace that is kept by spying and torture is not peace, but a rape. The peace that is kept with guns and bombs is not peace, but the swoon of a slow hemorrhage. The peace that is kept with a wall of separation is not peace, but suffocation as we drown in a pool of tears. The peace that is kept by a balance of nuclear warheads is not peace, but the catatonia of fear. To make peace, we must bring a new thing into the world. We shall find peace by adherence to truth. We shall find peace by open dialogue. We shall find peace by soul force. We shall find peace when we are ready to die for her, but not to kill. We shall find peace when we desire the happiness of others as much as our own. We shall find peace beating our swords into plowshares. Beating our swords into plowshares. Namaste.
Thank you for tuning in to Ayurveda and Spirituality with Alakananda Ma. We hope today's exploration has ignited a spark of curiosity and insight within you. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave us a 5-star review and share it with a friend. For more enlightening discussions and practical wisdom on Ayurveda and spirituality, subscribe and join our Facebook group, Alundi Ayurveda. To allow us to continue sharing valuable content, consider donating to Alundi Ashram. The links will be in the show notes. Until next time, may you walk the path of Ayurveda with grace and embrace the light of spiritual wisdom in your journey.
Trayambakam yajamahe Sugandhim pushtivardhanam